Today, we're going to have a little bit of a think about male anatomy and physiology. So, at the end of this session, which is going to be relatively short, we're going to be thinking about sperm production, sperm transport through the male reproductive system, and hormonal control in the male reproductive system itself as well. So, we're thinking about what regulates testosterone production, what testosterone does, where it acts, and what other hormones involved in this entire process. So first of all, we'll just have a quick overview of the structure of the male reproductive system. And of course, as we already know, that these structures exist to produce, mature, and deliver sperm capable of fertilizing an oocyte or an egg. And so if we're looking at the sperm pathway, it's obviously made in the testes, which sits within the scrotum, which is just below body temperature, so just below regular 37 degrees. Within the epididymis, the sperm that have been made in the testes, they drain into the epididymis where they further mature. In other words, they gain motility and they are stored in this location, ready for release. During ejaculation, sperm are traveled from the epididymis into the vas deferens, also known as the ductus deferens, and that connects to the urethra. The semen combines with fluid from a variety of different places. So one of those, it combines with fluid from the seminal vesicles, it combines fluid from the prostate, and also there's a mucus that is produced by the bulbourethral gland. And of course, in the final stage, sperm is ejaculated out through the urethra and then out through the penis itself. So here we've got a little bit of a summary of the various different parts of the reproductive system. And what I'd like you to do, have a little look at the kind of the half table on the left-hand side. That's looking at each structure. So testes, epididymis, vas deferens, seminal vesicle, prostate gland, and bulbourethral gland. Those are the ones we just briefly mentioned a second ago. And I really want you to think, what do you think's happening in each of those tissues or each of those structures? So link each of the A, B, C, D, E, and F to any one of those. So press pause and have a little bit of a look through it and link each one to the relevant structure. Okay, so we'll have a little look at the first one. So testes, hopefully that is nice and easy for you. I would hope so at least. That is obviously F, so that is produces sperm and secretes testosterone. Now, the next structure, epididymis, what does that do? That stores the sperm that has been made in the testes and allows them to gain motility and fertility through their maturation within that structure. So they're stored there and they gain motility. Vas deferens, hopefully that's nice and easy. So that transports sperm from the storage site to the urethra during ejaculation. Now these next three are probably a little bit more tricky for you. So let's see what you actually do know at this particular juncture. So what does the seminal vesicle do? Well, it causes the provision of a fructose-rich fluid that helps to nourish the sperm during their journey. So it's producing that nice fructose. Prostate gland, that is producing an alkaline fluid which contains enzymes that liquefy the sperm. So in the seminal vesicle, as well as that fructose, there are proteins in there that basically clot the sperm, or the semen as it's more accurately written. It clots it so that when it's released into the vagina, it stays in place during penis withdrawal. And then later on, maybe 30, 60 minutes later, the fluid that's present in the or released from the prostate gland, that breaks down that clot and liquefies it, allowing the sperm to pass through the cervical mucus into the uterus and up towards the fallopian tube where fertilization can occur. The alkaline fluid is there to help protect the sperm because the vagina is quite an acidic environment, so it helps to neutralize that acid. And finally then, bulbourethral gland, well, that secretes a lubricating mucus prior to ejaculation. So those are the main functions of the structures that I want you to know about in terms of the male reproductive system. So if we take it looking at the testes, so again, here is one of your testes, and these are composed of seminiferous tubules. So they make up about 80% of the mass of the testes, the seminiferous tubules, and these tubules are the site of sperm production. And the cells are just outside and within these structures have specific roles. And the two cells that we're going to be focusing on are the Leydig cells that you can see there. They sit just outside the seminiferous tubules. And you can see the Sertoli cells, which are there helping to support sperm development, or sperm development is a better way of putting it at this stage. So, but both Sertoli cells and Leydig cells are absolutely essential for sperm production and sperm maturation. So, first of all, we'll look at the Leydig cells. These sit outside the seminiferous tubule, so just adjacent to it. And the Leydig cells respond to luteinizing hormone. So luteinizing hormone, as you know, is released from the anterior pituitary because it's released from there in females as well. And an easy way to remember this is luteinizing hormone begins with an L and it acts on the Leydig cells, which also begins with an L. And that produces testosterone. Testosterone doesn't begin with an L, obviously, but you just have to remember that one. But it will become quite clear afterwards or later on how you can actually remember them quite easily. And testosterone that is produced from these Leydig cells can either act adjacently, so on these Sertoli cells, to aid in spermatogenesis. That's telling you that testosterone made in the Leydig cells is absolutely essential for spermatogenesis, the making of sperm, but it also acts on other tissues. For example, in muscular growth, facial hair development, chest development, and a variety of other things that you already know. Then we've got the Sertoli cells. So remembering what they are, it's the FSH follicle stimulating hormone, also released from the anterior pituitary, acts on the Sertoli cells that are within the seminiferous tubules. And these Sertoli cells, they line the seminiferous tubules and they nourish and support the developing sperm. And they also help to concentrate testosterone within the tubules themselves, and it converts that testosterone to dihydrotestosterone, which is just basically a much more powerful androgen, or male sex hormone as they're traditionally known, but an androgen is better wording. So it just is a much more powerful version of testosterone. So a key thing from this is that spermatogenesis, so the development of sperm, requires both FSH from the anterior pituitary, which acts on the Sertoli cells, and testosterone as well, which is released from the Leydig cells and acts on the Sertoli cells. Which reminds me, how do you remember what hormone is acting where? Well, FSH, so you've got the S there, acts on the Sertoli cells there to stimulate spermatogenesis. And remembering you've got the Leydig cells being stimulated by luteinizing hormones. You've got the L's, and then testosterone's the leftover one, if you want to think of it like that, and that goes with the L's. So let's have a little think about what's happening in reproductive endocrinology. So as you can see on the left, you've got a nice seminiferous tubule here. You've got the Leydig cells just outside and the Sertoli cells inside. And you've got the developing sperm. So you've got the hypothalamic signals. There are signals coming in at the level of the hypothalamus, whether that's stress, losing weight rapidly, which obviously inhibit these processes, or regular processes in terms of feedback and weight and nutrition and other things, and various genes that have been switched on, are stimulating the hypothalamus to release gonadotrophin releasing hormone. That acts on the anterior pituitary to stimulate the LH secreting cells and the FSH secreting cells. I'd like you to just have a little bit of remember what you can remember from the last couple of slides, thinking, right, where does LH secreting cells, what do they release? Well, hopefully you can do that. That acts on the LH, releases LH rather. But I want you to remember, what cells does it act on and what does it produce? I also want you to do with FSH secreting cells. They obviously release FSH. What cells do they act on and what do they stimulate? And then we'll talk about the little bits of negative feedback, which are very similar to what's happening in the female reproductive system, or analogous in terms of hormonal inhibition. So press pause and have a little bit of a think. What can you remember of those aspects? Okay, so we'll start with LH secreting cells. So obviously they release LH and they act on the Leydig cells. The Leydig cells go on to produce testosterone, and testosterone has negative feedback back on LH and on GnRH, so the hypothalamus. So therefore it's inhibiting its own production, which means you always, just like every other endocrine system, you have a normal concentration or a reference range concentration of testosterone in your body. So that's what testosterone is doing. What about follicle stimulating hormone? Well, that releases FSH, and acts on the Sertoli cells. And it produces two things, or it stimulates two things, one of which is the same in females, um, well, similar, or the same hormone rather, not by Sertoli cells, obviously. It releases inhibin, and inhibin inhibits FSH. So again, keeping this whole cycle in balance. But the Sertoli cells, remember FSH, the S, stimulates Sertoli cells to stimulate spermatogenesis. And testosterone is also acting on those Sertoli cells to stimulate spermatogenesis. So that's in essence the feedback loop that is happening, the endocrine feedback loop, thinking about what processes are happening. Last little thing for you to think about is that testosterone, remember, it's converted to dihydrotestosterone in the Sertoli cells, and that is stimulated by 5-alpha reductase. So that's the enzyme that stimulates it or converts it to this much stronger androgen. Final thing for you to think about is a review question. So a 20-year-old man goes to his GP with impotence. He's only got sparse pubic and axillary hair, genitalia are infantile, and muscular development is poor. And so the GP arranged for some blood tests to be taken. So they looked at testosterone, LH, and FSH. What I want you to do is look at those results and interpret. Is this hypo or hypergonadism? Nice and easy, I hope. And is it primary or secondary in its origin? So is it a gonadal issue, or is it potentially a pituitary issue? So again, press pause, look at it. Is it hypo or hypergonadism? And then is it primary or secondary? Okay, so this case shows that the testosterone is low with a low LH and FSH. So therefore, because of that, you know that the problem lies at most likely the pituitary issue. It could also be the hypothalamus, but we're not thinking about that too much. So we're thinking pituitary at this case because LH and FSH are both low, which means the anterior pituitary is not producing enough LH and FSH, which means it can't stimulate testosterone production. So therefore, this is secondary hypogonadism. And just to put it into context, hormone patterns like this are very important and a key to diagnosing endocrine disorders. And that is it. Quick and over with.